Oh, hey, novel writers. Wow, that was a great marathon session last night. Congratulations for getting started on your plotting, and hopefully you're starting to see your story come to life and how it's going to look. I do want to cover a few things that I didn't get to last night because of time constraints. Talking about the writing of a section as we move forward now. Um, And but before that, I want to take a couple of seconds just to talk about flashback because many of you are using flashback as a section to introduce past events in your characters' lives, and I think that's okay. But as you probably know, I'm not a huge fan of flashbacks. In fact, I don't like them at all. I don't like reading them in stories, and I don't like writing them. And here's why, and especially if a flashback is presented early in the story. Your reader's going along, they see your character, your lead character, going about their normal business. A big event happens, and then they're forced to act. And then all of a sudden, there's this flashback to when they were a kid or when they were in graduate school or whatever. And your reader is all of a sudden like, hey, what's this about? It's a disconnect. And what it does is it effectively puts a wall in front of your reader's engagement. And so they may have the patience. They might think, well, okay, you're Stephen King, so there must be something to this. So I'll keep reading. I'll just keep going. But none of us is Stephen King or Margaret Atwood. So because of that, a flashback is risky. Okay, is risky, and I'm not a big fan of it. There are two ways of bringing up background information, which I think are much more effective. The first is, as we talked last night with Nick's story, is through dialogue. So remember, there was the scene near the beginning where Scott and Pete are on the boat, and the boat is powerless, and so they're kind of hanging around, wondering how to fix it. That's a perfect opportunity for the two of them to have a conversation. And it's during that conversation that Scott or whoever your character is can talk about something that happened in the past and how that's impacting on what they're doing at the present. So that's one way. The second way is through some self-reflection. So suppose your character is by themselves, maybe they've got the TV on, maybe they're leafing through a book, doing something, and then they start reflecting on past events. Not a flashback, but a reflection. So they're always in the present. You, as the reader, are always in the present with them. And we get rid of the disjointedness or the discontinuity in your novel without losing the richness that a past recollection can bring. So, if at all possible, what I like to encourage writers to do is to forget about the flashback, stay focused in the present, and then use the mind to recall or have a conversation to bring out some of those rich events from the past. Okay, if you really insist on using flashback, be very careful with it and try to make it a small, a shorter section, so that your reader isn't thrown a curveball to early in your story. Now, some things we didn't get to last night that I want to go over very quickly are the three modes of writing, because now we're getting ready to write once the plotting is done. And the three modes are as follows: action, summary, and dialogue. Some of you who have taken workshops with me before, you recognize this already. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly. It's something you can look at on your own, and once you get into the writing of a section, you can recall this. And we will talk more about this as we move along in the workshop as well. So looking at action mode, when you're writing, try to keep things chronological. Okay, the bullet hit the bad guy screamed and fell to the ground. It's not happening simultaneously. So we have to be careful using words like as and while. For example, she screamed as the bullet tore into his chest. No, the bullet tore into his chest, then she screamed. So it's a little thing, it's a subtle thing, but your reader's subconscious will pick up on this as a discontinuity when they're reading. Trust me on this, it happens all the time. A reader will feel, oh, there's something not quite right, and they'll look for things like dialogue tags, and they'll look for things like sentence structure, but most often it's because there's a discontinuity in the action. So we don't summarize in events. We either show them as action or we don't. We'll talk about this next week. Summary sections. Summaries are wonderful things if you want to telescope time. There are other things you can do as well, of course, report events and so on, but telescoping time is a wonderful thing. So, example, every morning for the next 2 weeks, Joe arrived early for his shift. So we want to jump 2 weeks ahead, you can do that. Another way is focusing on emotion. So this, again, is getting into the character's viewpoint. So, Joe might have been arriving early for his shift in order to prove to his boss that he was a good worker and responsible and everything else, and kind of get into his head around that. So we can use it for showing emotion as well. Writing background and descriptions. The biggest thing here is no info dumps. You know when you do it, so don't do it. No info dumps. If your character wouldn't think it and your character wouldn't say it, then it doesn't belong in viewpoint writing. Remember, we're doing viewpoint writing here, so we don't need a whole lot of dumping of background information. Just trickle it in when it's necessary. That's all you need to do for it. Dialogue, most important thing about dialogue. You might have been told at one point, don't keep saying he said or she asked. You have to put in things like he barked, she bellowed, and all of those crazy tags. Don't worry about those. Just use he said, she asked all the time. Just use those because your reader doesn't read them anyway. Now, if you're reading Old English literature, you're going to see all kinds of she bellowed and he barked and all that kind of stuff. But we don't do that anymore. Your reader is reading through this quickly. They don't even read the tags anymore. But they are important for helping your reader understand who's actually doing the talking. So we do need them, but probably not as much as you think. The big thing about dialogue is make every word count. If a word doesn't advance the plot or show something about the character, drop it. One of the worst things that we can do is have dialogue like this. Hey, Joe. Hey, Bob. How's it going, Joe? Oh, not too bad. Same old, same old. Oh, yeah. Hey, say, you want to go grab a coffee? Well, yeah, I guess we got time for coffee. I mean, oh my God. Boring. Like, skip all of that crap. Get right to the thing. Bob and Joe went for a coffee. Joe, I've been meaning to talk to you about that project that's consistently a problem for us, right? Get right into the meat of the conversation. This is why you'll see on TV shows, no one, when they hang up the phone, when they're finishing the conversation, no one says bye. No one says that. It's just gone, right? Not needed. So it's out the door. Here's a couple of, this is the big thing. Feelings, actions, dialogue. And as I say here, doing this alone will improve your writing 100%. I guarantee it. And this is how we do it. We alternate. We don't just have dialogue. Joe said, Bob said, Joe said, Sally said, Mary said, Joe said. We don't do just that. There's other stuff going on all the time. And so this is how we can write this with a feeling, an action, and then the dialogue. Example. Mary felt a chill run up her spine. She threw, that's bad spelling there. She threw the letter into the fire. That's the action. You'll never know the truth now. That's the dialogue. And just doing that kind of thing reveals so much more about the story and really brings it to life. And you can vary this up, of course, feeling, action, then a dialogue, or feeling dialogue, or action dialogue. There's different ways of doing it. As long as you're aware when you're writing your first draft of breaking up the dialogue into things like this so that it doesn't get overly boring. All right, this is stuff. We don't need to look at this today. So for next week, let's keep developing your plotting as you're going along if you haven't finished it yet. And then start writing your sections and see how that goes. So tips for writing the novel. Super important. The important part in writing is not always choosing, in fact, is rarely choosing just the right word or just the right dialogue. What it is getting the story on the paper or on the page. Just get it out. Don't worry about how many sentences you begin with pronouns. Don't worry about how many sentences that start with, it was a dark and stormy night. Don't worry about that stuff at this point. Just get the story out, get it on the paper. And the reason why I suggest this, I highly recommend this actually, is because it takes so long to write a novel. It's a big project. And if we start getting hung up on choosing just the right word and this and that in every section that we're writing, it will take forever and never get finished. You'll get bored of it. So the important thing is get the story out. It's like Nick was saying last night. After a while, when he was plotting, it's like, yeah, just don't worry about it. Just write it out. Write it out. You can always revise it later, but just get it out. So that's what I mean by this. Don't think too much. Just write your story. Just get it out there. Okay? Don't think too much about it. Get the story out. Once it's out, you can then go back and revise it after you've finished your first draft. Okay, so drafting your story, stay in creative mode. Don't worry about your grammar and the editor that keeps saying that you're a bad person. Don't listen to that voice. Just get the story down, get it out. Don't worry about editing. Just keep it going. Once the first draft of your story is done in 2 months or so, then you can go through and start revising it and bringing out those nice juicy words and so on. That's the time to do that, okay? So we'll look at those things later on once we get closer to the end. So finish the plotting for next week. Doesn't have to be perfect because you know it is going to change as we go along. And start, if you're ready, start writing your novel draft. Here's something that you could aim for, is to try to write a section in 1 to 2 hours. Now, at the beginning, it might take a bit longer, but as you start getting into your story and start getting comfortable with the writing, you'll be able to reduce that time considerably. So 1 to 2 hours per section. Again, you're looking for an average of about 1,200 to 1,300 words per section. Some will be longer, some will be shorter. So that's just kind of the ballpark rule of thumb there. And this is exactly what I do. I write a section without worrying about how good the writing is, because I just want to get the story out. I'll review it for obvious bonehead things. So this is like, okay, usually what I'll do is if I've finished a section, and the next day I'm writing another section, I'll read the previous one I just wrote, because that tells me where I was, and that's when I'm going to see things like using the same word twice in the same sentence. If it's really simple, I'll just fix it right there. But I'm not editing. I'm not going through and looking at all my sentence structure and consistencies and all of my pronouns. I'm not doing that at this point at all. But if there's something really obvious, I'm just going to take a second and fix it up. Next thing, let's make sure the section failure is brought down hard, or if it's your opposition, it's a success, and then move on to the next section. So hit them, move on, hit them, move on, and that way, once you get into the rhythm of the sections, of section writing and viewpoint writing, it will start flowing quite rapidly, and it almost writes itself. So again, getting back to the first point here about plotting, your plotting doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be complete. And so as you go along, maybe you write 5 or 6 sections, take another look at your plot to see if it's still hanging together, or if there's something now, a little nuance that you want to add in for later on in the novel, you can do that at this point. I think that's it. So good luck with your plotting and your writing this week. Feel free to send stuff to me if you want me to have a quick look at it, or post it up on the Facebook group if you want someone there to have a quick look at it. And stay at it. The hardest thing about writing a novel is actually putting in the time, finding the time to do the work, because it is a large project and not always easy. So again, congratulations on your work this week. It's just amazing the amount of creativity in the group. So I'm really pleased with that. And so all this to say that we'll see you next week, and good luck writing until then.